Hi, welcome to another Malicious Compliance episode of StorytimeGuru. In this episode, we will read 4 of the best malicious compliance stories. Our first episode is titled, If You Don't Like the Way I Teach, Why Don't You Complain to Someone About It? Our second episode is titled, Don't Go in the House with Your Muddy Shoes. Okay. Our third episode is titled, Was Asked Not to Speak Unless Asked, So I Did or Rather Did Not. Our fourth episode is titled, I Have to Wrap All the Christmas Presents Myself? Okay, I'll make that known. Hope you like it. If you like my content, please support my channel by clicking like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the notification bell. If you don't like the way I teach, why don't you complain to someone about it? Posted by Cole Carmit. So today at work we were talking about my rather bad handwriting, and it reminded me that perhaps the proudest moment of my life could be considered malicious compliance. If it is not, I apologize, but the reason why I am posting this is because I did what I did with the intention to get my teacher in trouble, which worked in the long term, but I did not expect the events to follow my compliance to occur. This story is also quite long, which I also apologize for as well. This took place roughly 19 years ago when I was in middle school. I had, and still have, a disability that prevents me from writing legibly. However, my parents quickly learned I had an insane typing speed. As a result, my ADHD psychologist and parents got me an Alpha Smart word processor for my 5th grade Christmas present. It would be an understatement to say this was a life changer. My assignments became so much easier. I knew the stuff, but couldn't write it down. My attitude about school changed, and I became the hip popular kid at school for having this fancy new piece of cutting-edge technology. None of my teachers between the 5th and 7th grade had an issue with this, and were quite impressed by the technology. Mind you, word processors weren't exactly new, but seeing them in schools were unheard of at this point as they were quite expensive. This changed in the 8th grade with Mrs. Grump. Mrs. Grump was your traditional old woman who looked like my great-grandmother, gray hair, wrinkles upon wrinkles, a bead necklace that reached past her breasts, flower print outfits, and clip-on earrings. Seriously, she was one bobbed hairdo away from being Karen's grandmother. First day I took my word processor out, she was on my back. Anytime she saw me with it, she would threaten to take it from me, and reduce my marks for the class. I recall myself standing up for myself the first time, but I was never one to argue with my teachers. I never needed to because my teachers up until then were completely understanding. When she said no, I backed off. At that point school became miserable for me. When I typed up my assignments, Mrs. Grump lowered my marks for not being handwritten. Anytime I asked her if I could stay after class to finish my assignments or finish writing down my notes, she would lower my marks on the next assignment for wasting her time. Anytime I asked a friend for help while in class, you guessed it, she would lower my marks. Luckily, as most of my fellow students understood my problems, a group of them approached me and offered to help me. They started offering me their notes each evening, so I could bring them home and photocopy, so I could keep up with everything. We also hung out in the library at lunches, and they actually helped me with my handwriting so it could be at the very least legible, allowing me to write out my homework, despite it taking super long. I genuinely don't know what her problem was, but she began reducing my marks because of poor handwriting, and inspecting my binders to make sure I wasn't stealing other people's work. If she found a photocopied note, say it with me, she would lower my marks. This was absolutely ridiculous as none of my classmates were marked in such a way. Now, as I explained, I am not one to question authority. Despite being miserable with Mrs. Grump's attitude, I quietly accepted I would probably fail. Unfortunately, I don't remember why my parents didn't help, but I think it might have been due to my older brother being part of Mrs. Grump's in the past, and they thought I was being overdramatic. ADHD, remember. With the background out of the way, onto the compliance. I don't know what happened this particular day, but I had a sudden surge of confidence. It was a particularly bad day. I remember we were doing an assignment involving microscopes in class. We needed to describe what we saw, and instinctively I brought out my word processor. I put it on the table and looked down into the microscope, but when I came back up, Mrs. Grump was standing at my desk with my word processor in her hand. Mrs. Grump, I am confiscating this and throwing it away. Me, stuttering, but I need it, And it's expensive. Mrs. Grump, too bad. I have warned you many times not to bring it out in my class. You didn't listen, and so these are the consequences. At this point, she put it in her cabinet unit and shut the door. Everyone in the class was silent, and Mrs. Grump sat back down. Some of my classmates tried to calm me down. I was crying, and Mrs. Grump didn't care. In particular, I recall, of all people, one of the students who usually bullied me trying to cheer me up. We'll call him Jim from now on, as Jim now works as a coach at a gym now. I didn't work on the assignment, and when Mrs. Grump came to take my blank sheet, she scoffed. If you don't like the way I teach, why don't you complain to someone about it? I left the classroom, defeated, but to my surprise, during lunch, Jim came up to me with my word processor in hand. He stole it out of the teacher's cabinet while she was returning the microscopes to the lab. He told me he was going to keep it in his locker till after school when he'll return it, that way I wouldn't get in even more trouble when she finds it missing. It was at that moment when I snapped. I don't know what it was, maybe the fact that the person who had bullied me for so long was the one helping me, but I wanted Mrs. Grump gone. But what was I going to do? Well, complain to someone, of course. She is the teacher, and it's not like me to disobey the teacher. Now, in any other situation, I honestly don't think this would have worked, but I got extremely lucky in regards to the events that followed this decision. So myself and Jim went to the school's principal during lunch. Me and the principal up until this point had never officially met, as she had just started at the school this year after the previous principal retired. We are going to call the principal Mrs. Awesome. Mrs. Awesome was eating at her desk, and was surprised to be interrupted, though she did sigh when she saw Jim. I know for a fact those two were well acquainted. I think she thought the two of us had got in a fight, so she asked me to sit down and for Jim to wait outside. I started explaining to her what happened in class, and after she realized Jim wasn't to blame, she called him back in to support my story. When I mentioned the word processor, however, her eyes lit up. Despite never formally talking before, it was clear she knew who I was. The discussion shifted to the word processor itself, and she asked me to go over its functions and everything. I showed her how I could type on it, transfer the files to a computer to either print off or email, the typing tutorials loaded on it. I explained why I needed it, showing her my handwriting, and how I had relied on it since the 5th grade. She, and Jim, seemed quite interested in it, taking notes and everything. At the end of the impromptu tutorial that lasted, Mrs. Awesome thanked me, and had to step out for a moment. After she brought me back in, she explained to me that there was nothing she could do at this point in time. She gave me an out-of-school suspension for a week, but explained I was not in trouble at all and it wasn't being marked against me. The explanation I believe she gave was for stealing out of the teacher's cabinet, though I wasn't required to return the word processor. This also got Jim out of trouble as well, which he was thankful for. Mrs. Awesome said that everything will be taken care of next week when I return, and she'll contact my parents explaining the situation. The week I was off, Jim was coming by and dropping off his homework, so I could photocopy it and not fall behind. Quite frankly, at first I thought he just wanted me to do his work for him, as it was a complete 180 on how he used to treat me. But we became good friends after this happened. Even asking him today, Jim doesn't recall why he started treated me better after Mrs. Grump took my word processor. During those days, my parents were on the phone constantly. I wasn't aware what was going on, but they bought me a new game, bought takeout a lot. Genuinely, I felt pampered. My parents came in with me when I returned, but rather than to the classroom, I was brought to the school's boardroom instead, where a bunch of people in suits were. My family doctor and ADHD psychologist was also in attendance, which honestly shocked me. Mrs. Awesome explained to me that these were representatives from the school board and that they were extremely interested in my word processor. In hindsight, it was a bit of a dick move for no one to inform me that I was being brought in front of the school board to present my word processor, but I began explaining it like I did to Mrs. Awesome, showing the different functions and such. After I finished, my family doctor and psychologist gave a better explanation than what I gave as to why I needed it and how it helped. And it ended with my parents explaining how it has changed my education and how I enjoyed school. Honestly, I don't recall the immediate response, but a day later Mrs. Awesome did explain everything to me. Apparently, she was actually a sitting member of the school board who had been standing in as principal that year until they found a replacement. When I showed her the word processor, She saw the potential they had to help students such as her own daughter who had similar circumstances as me. She contacted the school board about potentially investing in some word processors for each school in the district for the next year, but they wanted to see it first. Again, this was a rather new concept all things considered. That's why she needed me that day, and why she allowed me to stay home for the week, as there was no rule in place to protect the word processor from being confiscated and possibly destroyed. I still question why I was never informed until the actual meeting, but whatever. Anyways, due to the presentation, I was given permission to continue working on my word processor, much to Mrs. Grump's dismay. She was also required to adjust all my previous marks to remove her deductions. Meanwhile, the school board decided on ordering 5 to 8 word processors for each school in the district for the next year, this school getting 8 as it was a larger school. Students in what was called resource class, basically a class for students who needed extra attention, had the option to sign out the word processors for a day to help work on their in-school assignments. There was an altogether increase of the resource students' marks as a result of this change, I've been told, and the school board began looking into other ways to help students. But what about Mrs. Grump? Other than having to readjust my marks and allowing me to use my word processor, she got off scot-free. It's great and all that I made a huge difference in my school district, but how did Mrs. Grump get her just desserts for making 8th grade a living hell for me? Well, I don't know if this was mere coincidence, outside interference, or a parting gift from Mrs. Awesome after she returned to her position in the school board, but all resource students coming into the 8th grade had been assigned to Mrs. Grump's class the next year, and as a result they were signing out the word processors constantly in her class. I learned this because my 9th grade class was right across the hall from her classroom, and windows in the classrooms allowed me to look across into her class to see 4 to 6 students typing up a storm on their word processors. This came to a head however when Mrs. Grump took one of the word processors and threw it out the window. After that, Mrs. Grump was asked to retire halfway through the school year, and replaced with the sweetest teacher that held ice cream parties for the students that completed all their homework assignments each month. And that, everyone, is probably the proudest moment in my life. Not only did my actions result in students with disabilities getting more resources to help them, but I also watched the worst teacher I ever had the pleasure of meeting get escorted out of the school by security. By popular demand, TL, Dr. Teacher tells me to complain to someone else, ended up changing the lives of hundreds of students by complying. Brief update. I really didn't expect this to blow up like this, so I thought I would elaborate on a few things, specifically regarding why I didn't get my parents involved. Asked my mother this and she recounted this story. I was actually quite embarrassed by my parents at the time due to something that happened in the 7th grade. We went to an overnight camp as a class trip, and my parents were supervisors. My father accidentally set fire to my tent, so I was forced to sleep in their tent instead. Rumors started to go around the school, specifically from Jim I believe, that, while quickly quashed, left a rather sour impression. Best reply by Kellamvor, Sparky Fox. This is the very essence of malicious compliance. You did exactly what Mrs. Grump suggested that you do. Also, Mrs. Awesome needs to be cloned and set up working in schools all over the world. Someone that keen on improving the lives of school children should be cherished. Don't go in the house with your muddy shoes. Okay. Posted by Merrick. I've been sitting on this story for a long time and I'd like to share it with you. Even if this seems like a minor incident, it satisfied my years-long appetite for revenge. I can't list all the nasty things she said to me and my family, but take my word for it. This story comes from a few years back, before my grandmother was bedridden because of severe Alzheimer. You see, after my grandfather died in the early 80s, my grandmother and her youngest sister moved in together. The youngest sister was and is an unpleasant woman in my humble opinion. I doubt she is well loved among the family either. My dad thinks her behavior to my grandma somewhat sped up the process of her Alzheimer. I'm fuzzy on the details of when this took place, but my dad decided, as a family, we should take my grandma on a holiday on the Greek islands to give her some breathing room from her sister's shenanigans. We spent about a week on chaos and went back to my grandmother's summer house. There was an infrastructural work of some kind just outside the garden gates, which meant there was a big trench with the dirt shoveled on either end. Since my dad had back problems, I had to carry a significant chunk of the suitcases, so I pick up 2 big suitcases and my backpack and walked up to the garden gates where my grandmother's sister greeted us. The first thing she told me, not even a proper greeting, and I quote as well as I can, "Don't walk into the house with your muddy shoes." I just swept up. We packed up and drove all day. I was exhausted and angsty, and this gave me a chance to have my small but fair revenge, so I complied. I walked up to the trench, took off my shoes and threw them over the trench in front of her and hopped over the trench, in my socks covered in mud with 2 heavy suitcases in my hands and a bag on my back, and went inside the house. I put the luggage inside and went for the second run, all the while she watched with her mouth agape in shock. My dad questioned me before bedtime and I told him I did what I was told. I didn't go in with my muddy shoes, just muddy socks. He agreed but told me not to do it again. I wasn't grounded, I could tell from his voice. My dad was as amused as me, not to mention my mother was standing beside my dad and giggling during the conversation. As for my grandmother's sister, she didn't talk to me for weeks, which I thoroughly enjoyed. Best reply by Clownin' Me Head. Kudos to your parents too. Your dad understand why you did it but also understand the need to tell/remind you not to do it again. He also didn't punish you, while your mom knew to just enjoy the sweet moment when someone deserved it. Overall, perfect response/reaction from your parents. Was asked not speak unless asked, so I did or rather did not. Posted by man_of_Fennec. This story starts a month or so before the March of this year, let's call that BC. I had just joined a precision stamping company for an internship, and what they basically manufactured was washers, shims and spacers from cold rolled steel. They used about 34, 60 to 150 ton mechanical presses and had specific dies for each part. To make it simple, they had glorious punching machines with different sizes holes to punch. I had a manager above me whom I reported to, and he was basically a work of art in his own way. Regularly ignored chain of command. Carried himself like the king of the castle. Regularly demeaned jobs of people below him and had a blatant disregard for safety. He looked after the whole production, and I guess it a normal for people in top positions to get their heads stuffed with the wrong stuffing. I judged this pretty early on and never got in his way and did what I was told. Now little intern me was learning the basics and little things about everything, and spent most of my time on the shop floor watching operators do their job and study each process and the tools. The tools were unique punches for a specific part and couldn't be replaced easily. Now BC, it was normal for customers to give urgent orders with deliveries to the tune of 2 to 3 days as compared to the usual 2 to 3 months. This one customer, let's call them GG, a major automobile spare parts manufacturer, had the habit of doing just that, and our company manufactured the part within a few hours and always delivered on time. Because of this, the customer always stuck to us. During the first few days of my internship, the order dropped and I got to see the turmoil needed to reach the deadline in 2 days. I watched every step of the process and saw it through the end till dispatch. Now it so happens that an experienced operator had just joined our company and didn't have an idea of the little things of the workings here. He got to work on the part, and after he was done he removed the tool and had no idea about the designated place for the tool to be kept. I told him about the racks with numbering for each unique tool to be kept. Meanwhile, I get down to work and forget about it. He comes a few minutes later and tells me that he couldn't find the exact place for the tool and hence kept the tool in a place, equivalent to keeping a book behind a shelf, for the time being until he tells someone puts it in the right place. Fair enough. Then something happened a few days later, and we went into a lockdown. Jump to after something happened in a country to cause lockdown. Let's call that AC. The company has been closed for about 2 months, and we were working on about 30% of the original workforce, which was mostly machine operators. I had just graduated from my engineering and was looking for a job. They laid off some people in top positions, and as a result, I got promoted to the position of production supervisor. Basically, they needed someone who knew everything about the processes and production timings of operators, which we most definitely not me. But I came for a cheap price, and hence bippity boppity a wild op appeared. I tried my best to live up to it and took me about a week to get used to the pace. The manager kept bypassing me to contact the operators and have them orders without me knowing, which caused a lot of confusion. One day, that is the day before yesterday, he held a meeting to decide the production schedule that we were going to follow for the rest of the month. I don't know why the meeting was held, because the production planning department gives us the schedule every week, so I say just that in the meeting, I regret waking up that day. He felt undermined in front of the production staff, I guess, which caused him to just go off on me, scolded me for interrupting my senior and talking out of turn and not knowing enough about the company to even talk in a meeting. Also, to keep my gob shut and open it only when asked. Fair enough. Guess I was just there to look after the small jobs. The meeting finishes and I keep out of his way for the rest of the day. Just before my shift gets over, GG company drops the purchase order for their part. I saw it, read it, and as I wasn't qualified enough, decided to send it to my manager. Now company policy dictates you to let me know about overtime at least an hour before my shift gets over. Me being incompetent, forgot to send the schedule to the manager until a few minutes before the overtime deadline just to be safe. I knew the delivery was for 2 days later, so they had to get going early. The manager starts barking orders, trek me to wait overtime. I refuse, mention the company policy, and get scarce from his usual working space. There was some commotion around there, but my shift got over. I go home, sleep, come back to work the other day knowing that it was going to be a long day with probable double shift for me. I came prepared with the provisions. You people are smart enough, you know where this is going, so here's wrapping it up fast. Before I left, they couldn't find the tool they needed for the job, hence the commotion. The operator who kept it there was fired, and the company, knowing that they did it in bad faith, didn't call him for the location. I come back the next day, they still haven't found it. They have started developing the tool from scratch and had to call in the tool designers. They obviously had no idea that I knew it. We wouldn't be here if my manager had simply asked me, but I was to open my mouth only when asked, so I didn't tell them. I called the operator and told him to tell the company that he kept the tool in place just in case. The day gets by smoothly for me until lunch, when the manager suddenly sees me. He tells me I'm working a double shift and I say okay. He didn't ask me about the tool. I said nothing. This was yesterday BTW. The tool they made breaks down within an hour. The hunt for the old tool begins. Nobody asks me anything. Fair enough. I keep working on the rest of the production line. My first shift gets over. They have looked under every stone in the factory. It's almost midnight. Everybody is tired. My manager hadn't slept since the order came in. Now it's apparent the order wouldn't be completed. But they still keep on searching, now to the point that I'm writing this in real time. I slept in my office, a nice 6 hours. The manager was too busy to notice me. Woke up and got ready to leave, but decide against it. The delivery was supposed to be at 9:30 a.m. today. It's 3:30 p.m. now. They have told the customer they won't be able to deliver due to lack of raw material and lockdown era. Probably lost a customer. The manager hasn't slept in 2 days. I've completed almost 3 shifts and would be paid double for the overtime. I have just come from the manager's cabin. This is how it went, not sis. Me, may I come in, sir? Manager, what do you want? Me, did we complete the schedule, sir? Manager, what does it look like? Me, I guess not. Why though? Manager, were you under a rock? The tool was missing and we broke the new one. Me, if you don't mind me asking, sir, which tool? I haven't gotten used to the nomenclature yet. Manager's TN5386GG. What even have you been doing all this time? All the production supervisors were on the floor looking for the tool. I didn't see you once. Me, you asked me not to speak unless asked, sir, and if I'm not wrong, is that the tool that's on that place? Manager, what even are you talking about? We don't keep it there. Me, well, that's obvious that we didn't keep it in the usual place, isn't it, sir? Should have asked me. Manager, I don't think you even understand what's going on here. That must be a different tool you misjudged. I'll show you what tool that is. We go over to the place, and sure enough, it's the same tool. He immediately started yelling and calling for some people, and I make myself scarce. Safe to say that I might get fired, but I live this moment and I have a college admission in my hand. TLDR, was asked by the manager to not speak unless asked. Did what was asked. Sorry for any typos and all that usual stuff. Best reply by Algae888. Sounds like you probably quit there. If you like my content, please support my channel by clicking like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the notification bell.